Welcome to the Getting High on Leadership series featuring Paul Karasik. Paul is one of America's top management consultants helping leaders succeed. He is the author of 9 books, including Sweet Persuasion and Brilliant Thoughts and Provocative Questions. His insights appear regularly in major publications, and he is one of the most sought-after executive coaches. Paul founded the American Seminar Leaders Association and the Psychedelic Institute of Los Angeles. He is a popular speaker at national conferences and has been on stages across all 50 states and internationally. Paul's work addresses the question, how can we transform conflict in business into collaboration? With decades of experience in management, leadership, and psychedelics, he brings a unique perspective on personal and societal growth. In this series, we'll be discussing his latest book, Getting High on Leadership, The Leader's Guide to Higher Consciousness. We'll be exploring the concepts, techniques, and mindset required to revolutionize leadership. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Getting High on Leadership. My name is Sanchez, your host, and we are joined by the author of the book, Paul Karasik. Paul and I are making our way through the book, section by section, chapter by chapter, building that roadway and path towards conscious leadership. Today, we're looking at this section called the 4 Levels of Leadership Competency, and it can be found on page 116. If you'd like to, as always, you can find a link to the show notes down below. And welcome, Paul. We've got a good topic here on the table today, man, and looking at the 4 levels, maybe let's talk about first, why are these levels important, and then maybe run through them and talk shop a little bit.
Yeah, it's sort of what this chapter gives us is a kind of a roadmap to mastery in terms of our own process. And it's pretty much, whatever skill set, whether it's leadership or sales or management, whatever the case may be, there's still this kind of like step process of consciousness and competency and that connection, right? So briefly, unconscious incompetence, that's where we all start, which is I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't even know that I don't know what I'm doing. So that's conscious incompetence. That I would call that kind of hopeless. When you don't, you're totally unaware, you're unconscious, and that's the kind of like where a lot of us start. Clueless. Next step is conscious incompetence. Now I have an understanding of what I don't know. I have kind of a baseline for myself to grow. I see the areas that I can improve. So this is conscious incompetence, right? So there's
some awareness around the incompetence now.
Yeah, in the beginning, like you don't know what you're doing. You don't even know you don't know what you're doing, and you just keep doing it. And, that's kind of like looking for the light switch in the dark room. Sometimes you find it, sometimes you don't. And here we're saying we all begin kind of clueless, unconsciously incompetent. A lot of us get the wake-up call, God, I don't know what I'm doing. And that's called conscious incompetence. So now you're aware, you have awareness. Now, the third step would be conscious competence. So, which is, I know what I'm doing, and I know how I'm doing it, and I know why it's successful. So I'm conscious about the elements that are going to make me successful as a leader. And that's conscious competence. But that's not the highest level to know what you're doing. The next level would be unconscious competency. And that's where I think we all get there to some degree in some area where you're like doing something and somebody will say to you like, how'd you do that? And you go, I don't know, I just did it. And, kind of like my mother when she was cooking, she didn't measure anything. She was an incredible cook. Oh my God. And she baked and she was amazing. But I'd say like, Ma, how much oregano do you put in? She'd go like that.
Yes.
She'd use her hand and she'd say that much. And I go, Ma, that's not an amount. Like, I'm trying to get the recipe to bring it home. Like, because she was she was consciously competent, but she was also unconsciously competent.
Yes.
She didn't think about it. It was a dance for her. She didn't have to say, "Oh, is this a half a teaspoon or a whole teaspoon?" That's mastery.
It just became a way of being at that point, a way of doing.
Yeah, it's innate. You're not thinking about it anymore.
It's interesting that you return back to unconsciousness to achieve consciousness. Right. We're getting a little contradictory here, perhaps. Can we talk about that cycle a little bit? How we started unconsciousness and end in that?
That's an interesting, that you're picking up on that. I wouldn't, unconscious is not quite the right word for that fourth level of competency. Because you're super conscious. You're not unconscious.
It's almost like a hyper consciousness or super conscious.
Yeah, let me say it this way: you're more connected to your higher level of consciousness, but you're still not in that state of normal consciousness. So that's what it has in common with unconscious, right? Neither one of them are normal states of consciousness. Unconsciousness is the lack of any kind of consciousness, but the kind of consciousness we're talking about now is where we're connected to our higher self, to our higher consciousness, and we're not thinking the same way when we're unconscious. We're not thinking with that linear mind because we're getting downloads from our higher consciousness. And I've seen that with so many great performers. The greatest teachers often aren't the best at what they do, but they're good at teaching.
Right.
That's what I found out through the years.
It's a different skill maybe to be able to impart that and teach or coach.
Yeah.
Versus to really do and manage that on your own.
Well, because when you have mastery, like I said, that you would say, how did you do that? The person in mastery is unconscious or super conscious, however we want to say it.
Yeah.
And is not really able to describe their process. I know when I began as a management consultant, I was a very successful salesperson. I was, won the awards and the trips and everything else. But I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how I was selling. It was
just working.
It was just working. I just did it, and it always worked. And I was really good at it. But it took about a year to really become conscious about what I was doing, because I don't know if I was a master, but I was certainly good at what I was doing. And it took time for me to pick out the pieces. Oh, this is what I do first. This is what I do second. This is why I do that. And then go, how did you go it? And that's how my first book came out, was analyzing what really worked, but it took time. It took, like I say, about...
To really distill that, even though you're doing that process normally, to then try to explain it is suddenly like, oh, wow. I've been doing a lot.
Yeah. I would be at a loss of words. Like, well, how'd you do that? How did you close that sale? And I'd start to think, what did I do? I don't even know. I just, I did that. And then, so I started to line up all the behaviors and say, okay, and it is sort of a step-by-step process. And whether it's that variation or that, it's always that. And then I picked out my kind of like 4-step process or whatever it was so I could transfer it to other people. So, we all want to get to that unthinking or unconscious or super conscious state with what we're doing. And part of it is listening to our intuition. I mean, that to me, that's where in leadership you get some of the great conscious answers, because intuition only speaks in consciousness. It doesn't speak in unconsciousness. It only speaks in conscious. So when you're getting downloads or intuitive feelings about a situation or about a particular person on the team, this is stuff you have to sit up and really listen to, because that's your connection to higher wisdom. And it
Right.
comes not so much through thinking. Again, it comes through unconscious, or what we're saying here, superconscious downloads,
Yeah, and kind of having almost a comfort with leadership and with the requirements of leadership, that you can do that, seamlessly while you're taking all of these things into account that we've discussed in the previous sections, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
if you look at it all, it's 40 plus different things to keep in mind, but the act of actually leading is distilling all of that down and kind of embodying it.
And and
Definitely
being
takes experience.
intuitive, yeah. And that, kind of that tipping point thing. What is it, 10,000 hours or something?
Yeah, the mastery.
I think that to some degree plays into it. One of the interesting things, and I think we kind of danced around this quite well, but one of the interesting things that I would observe was that when you had somebody who was a natural and who was unconsciously competent, so they were good at what they did, but they didn't know what they were doing. They oftentimes, when I began to work with them, they actually became less productive.
Oh.
Which is an interesting, and it's and I forget we used to have a name for it, like the new guy syndrome. The person that would come in that didn't know anything and was having huge success, and then everybody would look at him like, what the hell, you don't even know what you're doing, you haven't been, we've been doing this for 2 years, and the person, through their sort of naivety, are very successful, but then they don't know what they're doing. Kind of like me. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I was good at it. So then when they begin to become more self-conscious, right, their productivity would actually go down, and it would be the beginner slump. And I knew it would be coming. But then what happens is the structure and the unconscious competency kind of meld together. So
It has a way of kind of blending back into that original productivity, or maybe even the whole point is, right, achieving more probably after that.
Oh yeah, then they would shoot up like a rocket. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
It is interesting that you've seen that kind of slump almost, or
it was
little bit of a plateau.
Yeah, yeah, almost every time. Because as soon as you took them out of their natural intuitive state, they were lost. They didn't have any lampposts or signs, on how does this thing work? I just went in there and I talked a lot, and then we got the sale. Like no. There was a process there.
How did you find your way around that conversation, or open them up in the beginning and make that personal connection, before bringing up the service or product you're selling, right?
Yeah,
as you start
absolutely.
to dissect that. Yeah.
Absolutely. There was a rapport building, and and listen, there's a million systems for selling, but when you boil them down, they're always the same, all of them, and including my sweet persuasion process. But there was as they became conscious, then they would begin to get that intuitive, natural mastery, unconscious competency coming back, and then they would hockey stick. Yeah, once they
right.
Because then they had a process that they could actually apply. Because what would happen is sometimes they were doing it and sometimes they weren't. And obviously, if you have a system that works, the more you use it, the more successful you're going to be. So it was fun. It's interesting to watch that. And maybe some of the leaders who were following this series have had similar experience with management.
Seeing that, yeah. Even implementing like a new process, there's always like a point where that process is like actually makes things a little worse for a few days before you can really tell. You almost need to wait a week or two to really look at like a bigger chunk of time to see if it was a good decision, because the first 24 or 48 hours might be uncomfortable for everybody, because that's change.
Yeah, and especially working with financial advisors and people who are service providers, they almost always take a slump when I'm working with their business models, because there's usually no structure there at all. And then we take away whatever is and spend time on building structure. And so production usually will go down. And I warn people, that in the beginning of the process, don't, we're gonna there's
This
a good
is what's
chance, not
coming.
always, not always, but I would say the vast majority of the time there's a downturn before the real real burst out.
Right. That's when that work is getting done. Yeah, and
Exactly.
it's interesting then. Have you seen, not everyone when they become a leader, are they kind of at different stages at different times, or would you say that someone is like soundly set on the third stage when you start to coach them? Or do
No,
you
we're
kind of
all
see them take some kind of third stage decision making, but every once in a while they revert to first or second level
yeah,
competency set?
that's a good question and a good point. We're always operating on all four, all of us, on different things, on different levels. Some aspects of leadership, they may be just, they nail it. Communication skills, listening, um, collaboration type things. But in other areas, they may need to go through from step level 1 right to level 4. There may be some things intuitively. Maybe they're really good at reading people on hiring, and that's a natural. They're literally consciously competent and unconsciously competent. Both of them. So we're all on different levels, and some of us are hopeless. We think we know what we're doing, and we don't, we don't have a clue that first step, which is unconscious incompetence. Or we delude ourselves and think that we actually are getting it done, at that level. But how many times have I can't even count how many times I've seen great leaders, but on levels 2, 3, and 4, but also still have things that they just don't see. They don't see themselves clearly. They think they're more talented. Like somebody, if you ever have a friend that thinks they can sing, but like you don't want to tell, like you really you really can't sing. You don't want to tell them. But the truth is that there are some areas that even great leaders that I've worked with will fall short, and they'll be on level 1, 2, 3. So we're all operating on all 4 levels all the time on different things, and just to be aware of that in the process. And we all want to get to that, not thinking about it. That's real mastery. Sometimes when you watch sports, I think I'm not a big sports analogy guy, but for this particular point, I think you see these greats, in football and basketball. They could never describe their process. They're,
fully.
No. They could do a clinic, for some youngsters on basics and things like that. But they're operating on such an intuitive level about where the ball is going, and I'm talking about these real masters who we recognize as masters in their particular technical expertise. They're not thinking. I do this, as I go. I'm measuring the distance. It's all intuitive. They're like totally tuned in. That's what we call the flow, right? You've heard that.
Yeah,
expression.
it is like the Zen of motorcycle maintenance book talks about that too, and like the connection from like a rider and their motorcycle, or a hockey player and their hockey stick, to explain those minute muscular corrections to hit the puck just right. It's
exactly
almost impossible.
Yeah, and it's everything. It's all parts of the process. I remember there's a quote about Miles Davis, the great jazz trumpet player, and he said, "I can tell how good a guy is by how he carries his instrument," which is fascinating. The point being that it's the whole package. Mastery is a whole package. how good he is going to show just the way he carries his instrument when it's in its case and how he opens it up
before it's even out.
And it's so true. I found that to be, as a musician, I found that it's true. That connection is multi-level to really, when you're in mastery, and it affects everything, about what you're doing. But you're not necessarily thinking about it.
Yes. Yeah, no, I think that's a lot of food for thought to think about here between the next sessions, and to kind of look back and take all that we've talked about and maybe realize when you're acting at one level versus the other, and starting to look at your actions or how your day went, how a conversation went, and just remembering that awareness, at least having that consciousness about all of your leadership actions, is the first step up. Right.
Yeah, and with some humility, leadership, we've said so many times in this series, is about communication, and you're never a perfect communicator. I mean, nobody is. You'll make mistakes.
Work in progress.
It's a work in progress, and you do the best you can, but there's no real. You'll never be without mistakes and areas to grow and learn.
Yes. Yeah, well, thank you for the wisdom on this one, Paul. And for those listening and watching, thanks for following us on this journey. And feel free to grab a copy of the book down below. We'll see you on the next one. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Getting High on Leadership series. If you have any questions, you can comment below or send them in via email to paul@paulkarasik.com. Follow him on Instagram at PK_the conversation. Find out more at wholesalerinstitute.com and psychedelic-awakening.com. The Getting High on Leadership series is produced by Rob Sanchez and Apartment 113, which can be found at apartment113.com and followed on Instagram at APT_113.